Hello world. Well, we are going to finish off our introduction to relationships basics, and then we're going to, in our next lesson, look at what makes an unhealthy relationship. So, as a review, we've already talked about perception and how our perception is affected by many factors. Our gender, for example, we talked about how male eyes tend to see movement better than female eyes, and how female eyes tend to see color and texture better because of the number of cells each gender tends to have. We talked about different disorders that can affect your perceptions, that make your brain more or less likely to pay attention to certain kinds of input. We talked about how trauma affects everything that comes in because our brain takes in what the information we have and then it cross-references it against our past, and trauma can affect whether we see something as a good or a bad thing. And we also learned about boundaries, how important boundaries are to be present and functioning in a healthy relationship, and how they protect relationship. We did a whole lesson on communication, how to communicate your boundaries, and that is something that you cannot have a healthy relationship without good communication, which requires, of course, both actively talking and actively listening. So this is a review, it's called the garden picture, of boundaries. This is my responsibility. So this is just a summary picture of what boundaries are. My words, my behavior, my actions, my efforts, my mistakes, my ideas, or you'd say my thoughts, my emotions, the consequences of my actions, this is my responsibility. So good reminder that other people's words, other people's ideas, opinions, actions, their consequences, their beliefs, their mistakes is not my responsibility. It's theirs. And so it's really important to keep your boundaries in mind when you're talking about relationships. So the first fundamental we're going to talk about today is trust. And this is my statement. There can be no real relationship without trust. And do you agree or not? That's going to be a question you'll need to answer in response to this in your journal. So this is why I'm stating that. If you do not trust someone, your interactions with them are along the lines of watching a dangerous animal in the same room. If you don't trust them, you don't know when they will bite you. You cannot be in relationship with them, in a real relationship. You can have varied trust. So for example, you could trust someone with money, but not your physical safety. Or in response, you could trust them with your physical safety, but not with money. I happen to know some people, one couple in particular, where the husband was served in the military and he has PTSD. And one of the ways that he unhealthily copes with his PTSD is that he uses spending as a crutch, an emotional crutch. So if he feels bad, then he spends money. And this is not only, obviously, held only to PTSD suffering military vets. It's something that everybody can be prone to doing. And unfortunately, in his case, it's so extreme that he will spend even the money that should have gone to rent and food and things his family needs on a video game that he wants to play or something like that. And so he is not someone that can be trusted with money because of the trauma, because of his issues, his self-control issues. Now, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily not someone that you couldn't trust to come over and feed your dog if you were gone for the weekend. Okay, you could probably trust him to do that, but you don't want to trust him to hold money for you because he might not be able to exert self-control over the urge to spend it. And sometimes in relationships, you can trust someone to take care of your physical needs, but they might not be able or they might not be willing to do anything about your emotional needs. And both of those need to be met in a good, healthy relationship. So it's okay to not trust someone fully. For example, in a teacher-student relationship, the teacher might not trust the students completely, and the students might not trust their teacher completely. Remember, trust is earned. And so if this person hasn't earned your trust, it's okay not to trust them. But if we're talking about truly intimate marriage-type relationships or extremely close personal friendships, trust is extremely important. You cannot have a real relationship without trust. That's why I said it's not possible. Trust defines where intimacy is possible. If there is no trust, you cannot have true intimacy. So we'll go over intimacy next. So here's a quote that I happen to find and like. People think that intimacy is about sex, but intimacy is about truth. When you realize you can tell someone your truth, when you can show yourself to them, when you stand in front of them and their response is, "You're safe with me," that's intimacy. Now, I happen to like this quote because I dated several people before I met and married my husband. And the first time I met my husband and I had some conversations with him, the thing that struck me the most, there was no real attraction or anything like that. The thing that struck me the most when I first met him was that I felt like I could be myself with him. I could be who I am, and I felt safe. And of course, that's a really good way to start out a relationship, if you can be safe with someone. And obviously, we went on to get married, and we've been married almost 17 years now, so, things went well. So here, I want to see what you guys think. So take a minute and think about this. What does this have to do with trust? The picture says, your circle should want you to win. Your circle should clap the loudest when you have good news. If they don't, get a new circle. So think about that for a minute. What does this have to do with trust? Okay, while you're thinking about that, let's define trust. Trust is, so you can trust that a hungry lion will eat you. You can predict its behavior. You know the hungry lion wants to eat you. You trust it to act according to its nature. But that doesn't mean you trust the lion. Okay? So there's two different ways you can use the word trust. Trust saying, I believe I can predict the behavior of this being, doesn't mean I trust it with myself. So trust can mean probabilities. This person or this thing is probably not going to try to eat me or whatever, but that's not what we're talking about here. So this is my definition of trust. So trust is a belief. Now, it could be wrong. You could trust someone and be wrong that they're not trustworthy. But generally speaking, if you have trust in someone, you believe and you have evidence for your belief that another person's will towards you is for good and not evil. And this is where trust can change. If evidence presents itself that that person was actually stabbing you in the back all that time you thought they were your friend, then you would no longer trust that person, right? Evidence can change trust. But trust itself is believing that the person is going to do good to you and not evil. So in general, a person who has your trust, you expect them to act in a trustworthy manner. So there's no stabbing in the back. There's no trying to get you to tell them your most innermost secrets so they can go and blab about it to all your other friends and laugh at you. Right? Trust means the person is probably going to act for your best good. Now remember, we talked about relationships, and one of the things I defined relationship is two people who are trying to help the other person be the best version of themselves they can be. And so trust plays into this by saying, I trust you are for me, for my good, rather than evil. Okay? So unless proven otherwise, a person who has your trust is someone who you believe deserves the level of intimacy or personal access you have given them. So trust and respect, being for someone, also involves treating them with respect. That means to their face and when they're not around. So if I had students who were very polite to me to my face and then went out of my class and talked about me and were really nasty in their words and their tone, that would be disrespectful, right? And they would not be acting in a trustworthy manner. So respecting someone and trusting them, these two things are extremely closely tied together. So trust implies that the person who's giving the trust believes the other person, is for them. And part of being for someone is actually treating them with respect. Respect includes all areas. Respect includes respecting that person's boundaries, respecting their position, respecting the other person's personhood, and respect is earned. Respect is earned. So when I talk to you about this meme, your circle should want you to win. This has to do with trust in terms of it's talking about your circle. The people you are close to, that you allow some kind of personal intimacy. You allow them access to your thoughts and your emotions. They're your friends. This is your circle. They're not your lovers. This is your friend circle, okay? Your friends and family. They should want you to win. They should clap loudly when you have good news. And it has to do with trust. It's only people who are trustworthy should be in your circle. That's why it says if they don't, get a new circle. Because trust assumes and needs the other person to act good towards you, to desire good for you and not evil. So let's continue on and look a little bit more into intimacy. Now that quote I talked about a minute ago about intimacy is being able to be your real self with someone. You have to have intimacy in a healthy, committed sexual partnership like marriage. It's not, you can be roommates with someone and not be intimate with them. So I know of some marriages where the people in the marriage are basically roommates. That doesn't mean they have an intimate relationship. Okay? All of us have intimates in our lives. And all this means is that this person in your life that you are intimate with, just has a certain amount of access to our inner self. So a friend that you tell, I had a really bad day and Mrs. Bourne gave me a bad grade on my assignment and I really felt like it was unfair. And I don't know why, maybe she doesn't like me. Okay, so for example, if this is how two people were talking, the person who's talking about that would trust the intimate friend to not turn around and go and report off what the person said to the other person and blah, 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 and gossip and all that. So intimates are simply people who we allow access to our inner self. We let them at least part of the way into our garden, into our boundaries. We give them some measure of access to our thoughts, our emotions. We might allow them to touch us, like give us a hug, like friends give each other hugs, right? These are people that we are letting inside our circle. Now, so intimacy means access, which is bounded by trust. We do not allow people into our inner circle if they're not trustworthy, into our private world. So intimacy can cover all the areas we've talked about. Mental and intellectual intimacy, you can let somebody know what you truly think. Emotional intimacy, you allow someone access to your emotions. Physical intimacy, you allow them access to your physical body. And this is really important to know. Intimacy in one area does not necessarily grant or allow access to intimacy in another. So it's your choice who you grant access to and what kind of access you grant. This is your boundaries. So for example, if you have a best friend and you've told them all your most personal thoughts and you're your BFFs forever, you have emotional intimacy with them, does not mean that they have physical access to your body. That's not necessarily, it doesn't have to go that way. You choose what level of access you give to other people to any kind of intimacy with you. Okay? And this is obvious stuff, but I want to verbalize it so everyone can understand. Intimacy and boundaries are extremely closely tied, because when you allow someone past a boundary, you're granting them access to a kind of intimacy with you. Now, obviously, when I'm talking about intimacy, I have to talk about sex. So, I'm just going to read this. The sex act is potentially a very deep expression of intimacy. So it is intimacy. In a healthy, lifetime committed partnership, it is the highest form of intimacy. That's why it's called giving yourself to the other person in our language. That's why all cultures have said, since ancient times, that the marriage partnership, the marriage bond, makes the two into one. So you have two people in a marriage covenant, and when they get married, the two are made into one. The sexual intimacy is only a final seal upon the intimacy in every other area that unites both partners into a new whole. However, so there has to be a however, as many have and are proving every day, the sex act can be divorced from true intimacy. So for an example, let's look at prostitution. Prostitution is the sex act, some form of it, depending on what's being paid for. The prostitute and the customer are doing a financial transaction. The sex act is part of that financial transaction. It has nothing to do with intimacy. There is no trust. It is simply a financial transaction. So sex should be the most deep expression of intimacy between two people in a lifetime committed partnership. But people can screw it up. So to define intimacy again, intimacy is access to someone's personal world, their thoughts, their beliefs, their emotions, and in some ways, their physical body. Implied in intimacy is a certain level of power to influence that person. So if you have a really good friend who's not doing any of their homework and you're afraid your friend is going to fail, and you have an intimate relationship in that both of you feel free to tell your true thoughts to the other person, you could tell your true thought friend, intimate friend, hey, you need to do your homework. I don't want you to fail. Okay? And if you have a true, intimate, actual friendship with that person, they will listen to you. They might not do what you say, because remember, their thoughts, their beliefs, their actions, that's their boundary, but you have a certain amount of influence over them. So mutual vulnerability, we're talking, sorry it's a little bit windy outside, we're talking about healthy relationships here. Mutual vulnerability is necessary in a two-way relationship. Just like a conversation, you have to have one speaker and one person listens. In a healthy conversation, both of you take turns. So it's not just about one person. In a healthy relationship, both people must be extending a certain amount of intimacy and vulnerability to the other person. And this intimacy is bounded by trust. Because remember, trust is believing the other person is for your good. If you do not believe they're for your good, why would you let them anywhere near you, right? You wouldn't. We don't work like that. We only allow people into our inner circle who we trust. Now, the next relationship fundamental we're going to talk about is commitment. So commitment is kind of like the fifth dimension. They talk about time, right? Commitment isn't first, second, flat line for the first dimension, then 2 lines in the second dimension, etc. Commitment is the fifth dimension, that the time being for the person now and into the future. That's what commitment means. It assumes all of those good things that are true about a healthy relationship, and it assumes those things are true in the current day and tomorrow and the day after. That's commitment. Okay? So, for example, I have a loving relationship with my children. My children trust that I will be their loving mother tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. This is one of the reasons why children in foster care have such a hard time with trust and commitment with anyone, because once this kind of true emotional intimacy has been breached in a deep betrayal, like by one of your parents, it's extremely difficult for people to learn how to trust again after they have been betrayed to that level. So without commitment, true trust and intimacy are impossible. How can you trust someone if you don't even know if they're going to be there for you tomorrow? So this is the way this works out in romantic relationships. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because if you cannot trust that the other person's going to be there for you, you can't truly have a healthy relationship. So this is why, statistically speaking, when people live together to try the other person out before marrying them, before committing to them, generally speaking, their relationships do not last. Because either one or both of the people in the relationship are unwilling to commit to the future. And there can be no trust if there's no commitment. There can be no true intimacy if there's no commitment. If someone's your BFF today and tomorrow they're someone else's BFF and you're like, last week's takeout dinner that went bad in the fridge to them, ew, right? There's no real relationship. There cannot be health or goodness in that relationship if there's no commitment. This is one of the reasons, on the flip side of the coin, that, for example, cultures that have marriages where the two people's marriage is arranged and they do not necessarily know each other very well or love each other or have any personal intimacy or access to their person's thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc. They're basically strangers to each other. Once they commit to each other in the marriage ceremony, in the marriage bond, all those other things can come. They don't necessarily do, but they can come because the commitment is already there. I'm for you, I'm married to you now and into the future. So it's possible to learn to have trust and personal intimacy after there is commitment. So if you try to have trust and intimacy without commitment, it doesn't work. And if you have commitment without trust and intimacy, eventually those two can grow. They can be learned and they can happen if you have commitment in place. Okay, fairness. You might wonder why I'm talking about fairness when I'm talking about a relationship fundamental. But this is what we're going to talk about in the next section when we talk about unhealthy relationships. In order for a relationship to be healthy, there must be fairness or evenness or mutuality in all areas. So if one person has overt or covert power over another, it is not a healthy relationship. So overt, if you think about oath as obvious, overt means obvious power over someone. So for example, the President of the United States has overt power over every citizen of the United States. Okay, the ancient kings, they had the power of life and death over their subjects. Now covert means, you can think of like covert operatives, secret, sneaky kind of thing. Covert simply means that you have power over another person, but it's hidden, it's secret. You're like a special agent. You might be blackmailing them, so you have power over them. But everybody looking at the two of you might not see that power. So if you have one person either has obvious or hidden or secret power over the other person, it's not a healthy relationship. So this does not apply to positional authority. like work relationships or family relationships where one person's position means that one person has power to make decisions for others. So, for example, it's not unfair for a mother to have power over a toddler's decision on whether or not to take a bath. That is a positional authority that is right and good, and it is for the child's benefit. At a workplace, a boss, hopefully, is going to be a good boss, but whether or not they're a good boss or not, they have overt, obvious power over their employees. They can choose to no longer have them as employees and fire them. And that's okay, because that is a work relationship where it's structured that the positional authority is an agreed upon, reality of the situation. So in an actual relationship, fairness simply means that one person's needs are not given more importance than the others. Okay, so what that means is Joe and Mary are married. Joe's needs need to be met, but Mary's needs need to be met. So Joe's needs are not more important, Mary's needs are not more important. They take turns meeting each other's needs if they have a healthy marriage. Now, at times, one person's needs might take up more time and attention, but this should be limited and not constant. So, for example, when I have been pregnant in the past, as you know, I have children. When I've been pregnant in the past, when I was in a weakened state just after giving birth, my needs, for example, not being able to walk after giving birth, my needs overcame my husband's needs to be able to just do whatever he wanted. And so he served me for a time by getting me my meals and bringing them to me in bed while I was recovering from the trauma of giving birth. And that's okay. I mean, if somebody was in a car accident, let's say your mother was in a terrible car accident, and when she finally got home from the hospital, she had to stay in bed because they broke her pelvis or something, or her leg in the car accident. And the rest of the family needs to get together and take care of her because she cannot take care of herself. That's okay. That is totally allowed in a healthy relationship. But to be fair, it means that, once her or his or whoever's needs, once that short period of time where that takes precedence over other things, once that's over, that means it goes back to being a mutual relationship. Fairness also goes towards being trustworthy. One person does not get to be excused from being trustworthy. One person considers the other person as much as they consider themselves. So we talked about the golden rule. Treat others as you would have them treat you. This is about fairness. You don't treat yourself badly, you don't treat them badly. They don't treat you badly, they don't treat themselves badly. This is a mutual, fair relationship. And obviously, we talked about fair fighting before. Fairness in conflict is important. Conflict is inevitable. There will be conflict. We're all people, we have our own baggage, we have our own needs, and sometimes my need might conflict with your need. Healthy relationships means the two people are handling the conflict with fairness. So that means during a disagreement, both people are allowed to have and express opinions. This is part of the garden. My boundary is I am allowed to think my own thoughts, and you are allowed to think your own thoughts. That's healthy. That's fair. Both people in a healthy relationship respect the other person even if they do not agree with them. There have been times in my classroom where students have said things that I plain out think are wrong, but I can still respect them even if I disagree with their opinion. That's fairness. Okay? And we talked about how to fight fair, the rules of engagement. We covered that a little bit. You can go back and review that. That is how you should approach conflict. So as a summary, what are the signs of a healthy relationship? Healthy interactions in all levels. So we've talked about having good boundaries, having good communication, both sides trusting and respecting the other, having intimacy that is deserved, being committed to the other person, that means wanting what is good for them now and into the future, and both sides being fair, not one person taking over the relationship so that only one person's needs are getting met and the other person is getting ignored. So that is the summary of our lesson for today. I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Can't wait to read your answers. Bye, guys.